Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webcast. This is IssuesWatch Live, New Jersey Budget Analysis. Before we begin, we do have a sponsor for today's event. It is First Commerce Bank, and they prepared a short video for us.
Good day, everyone. My name is Peter Capello, and I'm the Chief Credit Officer at First Commerce Bank. We are a state-chartered community bank with 10 branches in New Jersey. 5 are in the central region in Ocean, Monmouth, Mercer, and Burlington counties, and 5 are in the northern region in Bergen and suburban Essex counties. Our asset size is approximately $1 billion with a loan portfolio of around $850 million. Our size and locations enable us to effectively serve the commercial lending needs of the businesses and or the clients you represent. Joining me today is Ken Barron, one of our experienced loan officers who is located in Bergen County, who will talk more about our products.
Thanks, Pete. As mentioned, we focus on the commercial lending needs of closely held businesses in New Jersey and certain areas within Rockland County. In addition to conventional commercial mortgage purchase and refinance transactions, we provide traditional working capital lines of credit and term loans. We are also a preferred SBA lender. Clearly, the pandemic's effect on all businesses requires a focused effort on their debt structure and needs of additional funding in some cases to ensure the stability of the business community in today's very difficult, changing environment. My job, like all the other lenders who work for First Commerce, is to initially assess each lending opportunity quickly and determine the best direction to take. All the lenders are fully responsible to the client from the initial discussion and application through ultimate closing process in order to maintain responsibility and responsiveness to the client. Your topic today covers a lot of what's currently going on in Trenton. Directly or indirectly, those decisions and directions will surely impact a number of situations which require one type or another of potential restructured external lending. Pete and I hope that you would consider our bank in accommodating any new credit facilities as the demand for funding presents itself. Once again, thank you for your time, and we wish all of you well.
Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to send it over to Jeff Kaszerman. So, Jeff, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Kaszerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to IssuesWatch Live. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into several components of Governor Murphy's proposed budget for the fiscal 2022 year. I'm joined today by Richard Keevey, a distinguished executive in residence at the Rutgers School of Planning and Public Policy and a lecturer at Princeton University. Rich brings a unique perspective, having served as New Jersey's budget director and comptroller under 2 different governors from each political party. Welcome, Rich. And I'm also joined by Dale Florio, Princeton Public Affairs Group. Dale is considered one of the top lobbyists in New Jersey, and he has worked on behalf of the NJCPA for years. Welcome, Dale. I'll get us started with a broad overview of the budget. Then we'll discuss some of the specifics. On February 23rd, Governor Phil Murphy released his proposed budget for New Jersey's 2022 fiscal year. The legislature will now review it and consider changes. A final budget has to be signed by June 30th. The proposed budget is different in many respects from prior budgets because it had to take into consideration the fiscal fallout from the coronavirus pandemic. This includes items such as $4 billion in borrowing, the $3.4 billion received under the CARES Act, and the devastating impact on small businesses. And a wild card in all of this is the multi-billion-dollar aid package the state is likely to receive from the latest federal stimulus legislation, expected to be signed by President Biden soon, perhaps today or tomorrow. Okay, so here's the summary of the proposed budget. The budget calls for $45 billion in spending, which is 10% more than last year. This is a 30% increase since the last budget enacted when Chris Christie was governor. Adjusting for inflation, That makes this budget about 20% larger than the Christie budget. As a further comparison, Christie increased spending by only 5% over 8 years. Depending on how you do the calculations, Governor Murphy is projecting a revenue growth of 2.6 to 4%. 10% of the budget relies on non-recurring revenues. There are no tax hikes this year. There's a $6.4 billion pension payment, which is $1.7 billion increase from this year. This will eat up 14% of the budget. The proposal includes $300 million in direct tax relief to families in the form of up to $500 payments to single parents earning up to $75,000 and married couples with children earning up to $150,000. Schools will see a $578 billion increase in aid, which would bring the total to about $9.3 billion. The senior freeze and homestead property tax relief will remain the same as what's in the current budget. Municipal budget is also flat, no change. The proposal includes $200 to $755 million for small businesses, and the exact figure depends on who you're talking to. Under the proposal, this fiscal year would close out with $6 billion in budget. In surplus. The proposed budget includes a $2.2 billion surplus, which means that, in effect, almost $4 billion of this budget's surplus will go to increased spending next year. Today, it was reported that New Jersey will actually get $10 billion in aid from the new federal stimulus package, the American Rescue Plan, which is expected to be signed, as I just said, by President Biden as early as today, possibly tomorrow, but very soon. However, those funds will not be included in the budget. We surveyed our members about the proposed budget, and 65% said that the proposed budget would make the economy worse over the long term. While that may sound bad, I want to point out that it's better than our survey about the 2021 proposed budget, where 78% of the respondents said that proposal would make the state's economy worse. So, Rich, what do you think? Is this a good budget, a bad budget, or somewhere in between?
Well, first of all, if you can believe, in the midst of a pandemic, we have a budget increase of 11% in spending, driven principally because the state this year issued bonds of $4.3 billion for operating purposes, and that money will be available and carried over into next year. I have commented on that before and written about it. That was probably one of the worst decisions, in my opinion, that was made. First of all, it wasn't necessary. Revenues had been understated. It's now been increased by $4 billion compared to what was originally projected by the governor over a 2-year period of time. If the governor had waited a little bit before selling those bonds, which are non-refundable and were negotiated as opposed to competitively bid, we wouldn't have had to sell the bonds. So that's objection number one on my part, and that permeates the whole budget. And you sort of alluded to it, but think about this. This year, we will end with a surplus of about $6.3 billion. That's the current year. Part of it will be in a rainy day fund, $1.7 billion. And then at the end of the proposed budget that the governor has submitted, we will be down to a surplus of $2.2 billion. The obvious question is, what do we do the following year? It will be a very troublesome year. Another point, and then I'll be quiet, is the federal dollars coming to the state is about $6.5 billion. The other monies are going to local and county governments. And that money is for sure to come to the state. The question is, what is the state going to do with the money? Are they going to, in my words, frivolously spend it, or will they husband it to perhaps progress it over a year or two. So there's a lot of big issues facing the state over and above the simple budget presentation.
Okay, thanks, Rich. So, Dale, how about you? Is this a good budget, bad, somewhere in between?
Well, there's no good or bad budget, Jeff. I mean, I think, New Jersey's been dealing with austerity for 10 or 12 years, right? When every governor, whether it was Corzine, Christie, and Murphy in the early part of his administration, there just wasn't a lot of money. The goal was to keep things at least what you had the year before. Governor Murphy chose to push to raise taxes and did get some tax increases, corporate business tax, personal income tax for people over $1 million. And then the pandemic hit, right? And all of a sudden there appears to be a flush of money. So the hard decisions that have to be made when you don't have money still exist when you have money and you've got a lot of hard decisions. But I think if I pick up on what Rich is saying, it's harder when you have a lot of money because these are politicians and they're trying to respond and nobody likes to say no. So the fear here is that they won't be smart about the out years and will look very short term at all of this. I mean, in the governor's proposal, he's trying to do some things that all governors have tried to do: fully fund the pension, get more money back to education. There's some side one-time needs here for businesses that have been affected by the pandemic. But there are some things here that, once you get to that level, it's going to be hard to go back, like direct payments to low and middle income families. They're bumping the annual stipend, the amount. It's hard to go back on those things. Those things that were discretionary now become an increased fixed cost. So those are the things that they need to look at long term and figure out, we're going to generate surplus. We're going to have a large payment from the federal government. What can we do to make sure that not only this year, but next year, and for successive budgets, that we're going to be able to use this money effectively. One last comment. Rich talked about the bonds that were floated and had the governor waited a little bit longer. That might have been unnecessary, and I think most people, felt that he could have waited and still taken the benefit of them if the federal dollars hadn't materialized. But one of the unfortunate parts of that is that those were non-callable bonds, if I have it correctly, so that they can't, if they wanted to pay them off, they would do so at, I think, a significant penalty. And unfortunately, we will continue to pay debt on those bonds or pay interest on those bonds for some time to come, which is unfortunate. They got a better rate by making them non-callable, but we're now stuck with them for the period of the bonds.
Thanks, Dale. Okay, so by the way, it's ironic that having extra money is going to cause problems, but I definitely get it because, like you said, Dale, they like to spend what they have, and then people expect that money year after year. So we heard a lot about the negatives. Rich, any strong positives in this budget?
Well, yeah, I think we've kind of suggested it. There's a big increase in school aid, about $600 million, which will be welcomed by the school districts across the state, moving a little bit forward in fully funding the statutory formula, which has been underfunded for many years because of problems raising money. So that's good for the school districts, and that will have a positive impact on property taxes, or at least would suggest they're not going to increase by too much. We have the fully funding of the ARC requirement for the pension, the annual required amount. First time that's been done in many, many years. The state still has a very unfunded system. We're still about 40% funded, but we're moving, obviously, in the right direction. So that's positive. Now, whether or not the state can continue at that level is another question. However, that's a very positive movement. And I'm going to pick up on Dale's point. I can't believe, now this is a personal view, I can't believe that we're going to give back $500, costing $320 million to people who, in many people, won't need it. This is in addition to the federal disbursement. So it, in my opinion, is not a priority should be of the state government, of people making up to $150,000, getting a $500 check, costing the budget $320 million. There's a lot of positive health improvements. The governor has expanded considerably dollars available under Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, increasing the subsidy available to those folks. So those people who lost their jobs would now be eligible for Medicaid or for the Affordable Care Act, and the governor is intending to increase the subsidy available to make it easier for them to purchase health care. And there's several big initiatives in higher education, continuation of the funding for free community college for people below certain incomes. And as I read the budget, the first 2 years of the senior college education would be available to be spent as aid to the student below certain income levels. So there are a lot of positive elements in there. Whether or not those elements can be continued into the future years, given what I just mentioned in the beginning, remains to be seen. And one other point before I end, somewhere between now and June 30th, the legislature and the governor has to come to grips with what are they going to do with the $6.2 billion of federal aid. It will be available. It's pretty flexible, unlike the couple $2 billion that was received under the original COVID law. This will be pretty flexible. So what are they going to do is a big question in my mind.
On that note, we just got a question. How much discretion do school districts have in spending the federal relief? I think that first, from what I heard, and I want you, Rich, to correct me if I'm wrong, and I certainly could be. I have been wrong many times. But I thought that that's really a tricky question because the $3 billion that's going to local municipalities, it's not clear yet what they have to use it for. Is that correct?
I don't know the answer to that. I focused on the federal money coming to the state government, and I have not checked into what limits school districts or municipalities might have. My guess is because of the coronavirus and the impact on kids not being able to get into schools, it'll be somewhat related to making the school buildings more available for students. But I really don't know what constraints are on the money going to the school districts and municipalities.
Right. Thanks. I don't think at this point anybody does. One last question for you, Dale, before we move on to small businesses. What do you think? Is this budget good for businesses, bad, or somewhere in between? So let's just look at the business community.
Listen, I think that, in the near term, it's good. When, really the issues become long term. In terms of the corporate business tax, they're estimating, I think, they expected to draw more on sales tax and more on the corporate business tax. But at some point with these programs that they either raise the commitments or they are new programs, they're going to have to be paid for. And so the issue becomes, from a business standpoint, who's paying that? And, you're paying it in your property taxes and in the taxes you pay on your business. So, there is, through the EDA, they've set up a lot of small loan and grant programs vis-a-vis federal dollars. There is the $250 to $275 million for small businesses that the state has made available or will be making available. And, there's a big chunk of money that's coming in as part of the Biden package for restaurants and in the hospitality area, which probably among a lot of businesses have been hit the hardest. So in the near term, to address immediate pandemic issues, this is probably a good budget. What it will do to New Jersey's historical structural problems, it's all going to depend on how the policymakers set themselves up for the next couple of years as to whether or not, we fall off a cliff financially because we chose to spend all the money immediately.
Let me just jump in a little bit, just to second what Dale's saying. I think the business community is going to make out pretty well with all the additional federal money that will be coming, independent of coming directly to the state, but coming to small business and medium-sized business. And the governor has put direct appropriations in there, $50 million each year for what he calls his Main Street recovery program, and another $100 million for an economic growth initiative. So for those folks who suggest the governor, who I have a lot of critiques about since I just mentioned him, has produced some good aid money to corporations in the state, I believe. And in addition, if you may or may not remember, the EDA, the legislature just passed a $14 billion tax incentive program that the EDA will be administering. So that's positive. So there's a lot of money out there available to small business, medium-sized business. I'm far from an expert on the economic development and how the businesses are going to use these monies, but it's certainly a very large attempt, I believe.
Thanks, Rich. So we're going to talk about small businesses, and obviously it's no secret that they have suffered tremendously during the pandemic. But before we look at the numbers and ask some questions, let's hear what the governor had to say about this in his budget address. So let's go to the videotape.
Through this budget, we're ready to deploy almost $200 million over the next 2 years in direct grants, loans, loan guarantees, and other tools for countless Main Street small businesses. And this is all on top of the hundreds of millions of dollars we've invested directly in our small business already through emergency grants and loans, funds that have allowed many to keep their doors open through uncertain times. And we recently gave our business sector another boost when we announced that all the federal support our businesses received through the Paycheck Protection Program would be exempt from state taxes. Now, for the average New Jersey business, this will be significant. We think a tax savings of nearly $10,000 per business. And moreover, we've also made the expenses those funds went to cover tax deductible. Our small businesses will pay even less in taxes.
So I will hand it over to you guys. But before I do, I have to just say that I have an opinion on that last part of what he was saying regarding taxing PPP, forgiven loans. And the reason I have an opinion on that, right or wrong, is the society worked pretty extensively on working to exclude those loans from New Jersey taxation and to allow depreciation. So, I'm sorry, deductibility. So I just want to quickly note that in my opinion and some of the other people here at the society, because we worked on making this point, that not taxing the federal aid to the hardest hit businesses, we really don't believe that that should be counted as New Jersey aid to small businesses. It's, in our minds, federal aid. Not taxing federal aid that the state wouldn't be getting in normal years anyway, we don't look at that as a present from the state. Anyway, now that I've gotten that out of my system, let's move on to some statistics. It's been reported about 30% of small businesses have already gone out of business, and many others are clearly barely surviving. Of the $3.5 billion of CARES Act funds that New Jersey received, about $230 million of it went to small business aid, about 7% of all CARES Act funding. And the proposed budget has about 200 to 275 million for small businesses. And that number all depends on who's you're talking to and who's doing the counting. Business groups have been doing a lot of grumbling that this is a mere fraction of what should be spent. They say they've been saying this for a long time, but that they have been practically ignored by the Murphy administration. So, Dale, considering the devastation small businesses have suffered and the hundreds of thousands of New Jerseyans who depend on them for jobs, should more aid be included in the budget to assist them?
The issue, I guess, really, Jeff, is timing. And, a lot of the comments that you just made that you ascribe to the business community, I've heard them, especially I've heard them. They've been amplified, especially in the hospitality and restaurant industry. And, unfortunately, in some other states, there was a faster response than what we saw in New Jersey. So the question is, will it be too late for some of these businesses to really get back on their feet? For that statistic that you cited about those that we think might be out of business and can't come back, this might provide some seed money for them to start back up. It's just a hard question to ask until we get back to some level of normalcy where people are actually going back into offices on a regular basis, or we get a closer to normal summer where folks are able to gather. We truly won't know. I mean, if you talk to the airlines, folks are looking to take advantage of spring break and are itching to get out. So folks are chomping at the bit. I guess I would close by just saying that, listen, it's better late than never, right? The governor, I watch all of his press conferences, his Monday, Wednesday, Friday press conferences. He does highlight small businesses that have taken advantage of some of the EDA programs. I think it's a good visual on his part to show what some small businesses have done with some of the EDA programs. So they're there. I'm not sure everybody knows that they're there, but listen, if they're going to make this amount of money available in this budget on top of what is coming down from Washington, it can only help. I think the jury's out on whether it's too late or we'll have permanent damage to our economy.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Rich, I was going to ask you the same question, but I think that to a large extent you answered it just a few minutes ago. Sounded like you were pretty positive on the amount of aid they've been giving. But any other thoughts about this small business aid and the complaint that it's not enough?
It's never enough for everybody to get money. You talk to the school districts, they would say they didn't get enough money. If you talk to the healthcare industry, the hospital industry, they said the state isn't providing money for uncompensated care. So there's always an open-ended question as to how much money you can afford. On your comment, I don't think I give a darn who's giving the tax break. If the tax break exists, good. Federal tax break, state tax break, I think it's a tax break from the state also. Having said that, I think that as you mentioned, I did mention the 2 points that the governor made. $200 million over the last, for this year and next year, for what he calls his Main Street economic recovery, mostly oriented towards small businesses, and the very large EDA loan program. So they're very positive points, picking up on what Dale said. I think we have to say, and part of the problem, if that's, is the reluctance of people, rightly so, I think, for example, to go back into a restaurant, to go back into environments where they're still reluctant to run up against other folks who might be spreading a disease. So a whole bunch of money isn't going to solve that problem. Not to be a cynic about it, but so I think the governor's done a pretty good job in that area of trying to provide some leadership and some big monies for small and medium-sized businesses.
All right, thank you, Rich. I know I am one of those people who is paranoid about going out. I've been sort of hunkered down in my house. Behind my computer. I like to say that it reminds me, I feel like I'm in World War I behind my my machine gun, just waiting to get out of the trench. But anyway, that's my own little story. So let's take a look now at the pension and benefits system for public workers. The budget includes a $6.4 billion pension payment, which equates to approximately 14% of the budget. This is $1.7 billion more than the $4.7 billion in this year's budget. And as I believe Rich said, it would meet the actuarially required pension contribution a year earlier than originally planned. And this is something that has received favorable views from most parties, if not all, and that includes the NJCPA and the business community. Since health benefits are a few billion more, I think it's fair to say that pension and benefits make up roughly 20% of the budget. So, Rich, this question goes to you. Since I know you're the numbers guy, as well as all your experience in budgeting. So I believe our pension and benefits systems are in worse shape than any other state, or that's what I've heard. Is this true? And just once you get done with that question, just what are the numbers for the state's unfunded pension and health benefits?
Well, we're certainly at the bottom of the list. We're not at the very bottom. I know at least 2 or 3 states that are worse, and depends upon what year you record the unfunded liabilities. So, our unfunded liability, we're only about 40% funded, and our net liability is $99 billion projected over the length of time of when people would be receiving their pension payments. Likewise, the health system has a $91 billion unfunded liability. And folks may not realize it, but the state doesn't pre-fund the health benefit commitments as we do the pension health benefits. So all health benefits are on a pay-as-you-go basis, but if you extend it, the state's commitment over that 20 or 25-year period of time, you get a very big number. Suffice to say that both systems are highly underfunded. This is the first time in a long time we've appropriated the money that the actuary says should be appropriated. But remember, that appropriation is covering not only the current employee, but also those who have already retired and those who are in the system and expect to be paid over a period of time. So we're not going to have a decrease in this amount of money. It's going to continue at that level and maybe a little bit higher for the next 15, 20 years until the state gets up to the 100% funded level. The cynic might say, well, we don't need to get to 100%. We've got 80%, 70% over a long period of time. I might even buy into that. A more fundamental question is, should we be reforming the pension system? So we met the requirement this year. That's good. Will we be able to meet it for the next 20 years every year in a slightly increasing amount? I doubt it. So there's been lots of attempts to try to restructure the pension system. The most recent one by Senator Sweeney, in my opinion, is a good idea. If you are already a pensioner, if you're already in the pension system, okay, we'll commit to that. But if you're a new employee, we're going to put you into a different system. Because over the long run, the cost is just too much to be singularly dominating the budget. And now the state has made a lot of improvements on the health benefits, reduced costs considerably. The arc for the, not the arc, but the range of increases for healthcare expenditures has really slowed down. So a lot of good actions by this governor and the prior governor to restructure some of the health programs. So it's a big item in the budget. And it's been struggling for many years. Some years, as you know, we had zero appropriation, which led to the problems that we now have. So let me stop there. I think we're on the right track. We ought to take this opportunity to maybe reform the future.
Thanks, Rich. You know, you sort of addressed a lot of what was in the question I was going to ask. Now, you know, it sounds great, at least in the papers and so on, that the actuarially required payments are finally being made. And I think you hinted at this, but I think a lot of people believe this is the end to the pension problem. But it isn't. At least that's what I think you just said. Because we're still going to have, it's not like the chunk of the budget that it's taking up now in the last few years of 10, 15%. That doesn't go away, right? I mean, we're going to have to maintain this, these payments of a high percentage of the state budget in order to stay on course. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And just to remind everybody, just in case people forgot, this is not just the pension payments for state employees. The state funds the employer share of all school employees, all teachers, I should say, teachers, are funded by the state government, not by the local school district. If you look at a school district budget, you won't find any money as an appropriation for the pension contribution. The state makes it. On that same level, even if you look in the budget for Social Security, you know, all teachers are part of the Social Security system, as is state employees. And who pays the Social Security match for school districts? It's the state. So that's why those numbers are bigger than some people might expect them to be, because we're funding not only the state employees, but also teachers, and also we're contributing to the matching share in the higher education world. So it's a big number, but we're covering a lot of employees. We could have a debate about, you know, the system itself. Should it have been expanded or changed or altered? And that's why my view, when I finished my comments originally, was we still should alter it for new employees.
Okay. We've got a question here, and I think I know the answer to it, but you guys correct me if I'm wrong. The question is, did the new COVID relief bill, did it include money for public pensions? If so, how much did New Jersey get? So actually, I don't know the answer to this. I would assume that, well, Rich, this question goes to you. Do you know if any of this stimulus money, if it's allowed to be used for state budgets? You know, operating costs.
I guess my accurate answer would be I don't know, because I didn't read the details of that act. My guess is it's a fungible number that they're giving the state. I mean, the state could say, no, we're not using it for pensioning, we're using it for X, and then the other monies can be used for the pension. So there might be language in there, and I don't know, that says you can't use it for pensions, because that was always an issue as this whole COVID funding was going through. As well, some states are just going to use it to fund their pension system, et cetera, et cetera. So there might be some provisions in there. I think not. And in any case, the state as they put the budget together, didn't assume they were going to get federal money, and they funded it without it. So they're not going to change horses, so to speak. If that makes sense.
Got it. I guess along the same lines, we got a question. Can some federal relief just be allocated to the NJCPA? And I guess, like you said, the funds are fungible, so we really don't know what they're going to do with it. Or they could use it for something else, and then they now have the money for the NJCPA. So along the lines of what you said,
I'm not sure what you're talking about. NJCPA. What group?
I'm sorry, New Jersey EDA, the Economic Development Authority.
No, there's no money going to the EDA. Not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay. Got it.
No.
Dale, were you saying something?
No, I was just going to agree with Rich there. Nothing precludes the state from putting money over at the EDA, but there's nothing in the federal plan that earmarks it for use by the EDA. I think the state's going to have fairly wide discretion on how they use it. And as Rich pointed out, it's pretty fungible.
Okay. All right. So Dale, this is our last pension and benefits question. And obviously, as both of you were just saying, reform to those systems is critical, and it's something the business community has been calling for years and years. So here's a political question for you, Dale. With this governor so very close to the unions, and he also, I don't think that commitment is just political. I think he also has an ideological commitment to their cause. Do you think we'll ever see any significant reforms in these areas while he's still in office?
It's a good question, Jeff. I think, I don't know if Rich mentioned this and or if you did, but if not, I'm sure everybody that's listening in today, watching in today, knows that this is an election year for governor, right? So, we could have easily said this is clearly a re-election budget as well, right? And it, both from a legislative standpoint and from a gubernatorial standpoint, I mean, what governor and legislature wouldn't want to have, wings at their feet and a nice breeze to their back when it comes to revenue. So I think, that has to be factored into the calculus, and, whether it's needed and or a level of generosity in some of these programs. But I think, your question goes to the larger issue that we discussed earlier, and is, do you take advantage of good times to make changes that are sustainable? And we've been talking about pension reform for some time. Senator Sweeney, leader of the Senate, has been a stand-up guy on this issue. He understands the problem, and he's a union guy, right? I mean, he understands the invaluable nature of pensions to workers. So I think, presumably, if Murphy wins re-election, and if the election were held today, he would. But if he's reelected, I look for a real push to get pension reform. And, it should be easier during good times. I even think in a Republican administration, I think you'd find an interest in working with the legislature for pension reform. So in some respects, the state's maybe in a win-win situation. Good times will allow for an easier conversation about pension reform. A Republican governor certainly would be interested in that conversation as well.
Okay, so let's look at the borrowing that we talked about just a little while ago. Rich, I know you think all that borrowing was not a wise decision, but can you give us an idea of what the annual payment on those bonds will be, and I assume that it changes over the years, but let's say for the next few years?
I can give you my best estimate and some observations about it, but a lot of the details, curiously enough, has not been released. At least released that somebody can explain it. But best as I can tell, we're not putting interest payments in the first couple of years or paying down the debt. We're skipping it into the third year, so it won't begin until 2023. They're 10-year bonds, non-recallable, as we mentioned before. And the estimated annual cost in the budget over this 10 or 12 years depends upon when they start making the payments. And I haven't seen the maturity schedule to opine exactly. It's about $310 million a year to support the debt that was issued.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, they can't be recalled. And for the 50th time, I would say they shouldn't have been issued to begin with. But who am I to say?
Oh, Rich, we agree with you. So say what you please. So one of the reasons that one of the reasons why they explained all this bonding was necessary was that they were projecting low revenues coming in for this fiscal year, which turned out not to be correct. So, and a lot of people in the business community, a lot of policy analysts said that those projections were too low anyway. So, Dale, thinking about that, do you think the administration knowingly made low revenue projections for maybe as cover for issuing these bonds and borrowing?
There was a huge political calculus here. There was no way you could sell the idea of bonding for operating purposes without a message that said that we are woefully underfunded. Even as the governor routinely just asked for more federal support, and while he didn't, the Trump administration, as it will turn out, was not as generous as the Biden administration will be. But there was money that came from the federal government, but it was clearly a calculation on their part that we had to really put out numbers, and I'm sure the numbers were what the numbers were because there was a lot of indecisiveness during that March, April, May, June period, right, when governments at all levels, businesses at all levels were assessing, what's it going to look like. I think for, New Jersey, I believe, was the only state that actually extended its fiscal year. Had they done the budget, the succeeding 3 or 4 months, they would have realized that the economy adjusted, people adjusted, and there was some level of normalcy when it came to paying bills and paying taxes. But without a doubt, they took advantage of the crisis, and to their credit, they were able to get it done.
So as a follow-up question, Dale, in addition to the borrowing, there was a hike in taxes, millionaires tax, the raising the corporate tax rate of about $1 billion. And so my question is, do you think that one of the reasons why there were these low revenue projections was to use it as an excuse for tax hikes, which would then, create a permanent revenue stream to be used for future years? Because we know how hard it is to increase taxes, or how rarely it happens that taxes are increased and then lowered. And this happens to be my pet theory. So do you think there was any thought to that, even if it wasn't expressly said, like, you know what, we're in such bad shape, our revenue figures projections show us we're going to be down so much money, we need to hike taxes, and then sort of in the back of their head, and then this money will be coming in for a long time, and we can spend it on all the programs that the governor has prioritized. So anything to that, or is this just a crazy theory of mine?
I don't think it's crazy, Jeff. I think it comes back to what I said. It was all about timing. Nobody knew where all this was heading. And the governor had always wanted to get the millionaire's tax down from $5 million to $1 million. And Senator Sweeney was open to maintaining the corporate business tax. So, therein line was a deal to be made. And
I lost audio.
Hello?
We're having a little bit of technical difficulties here, folks, so give us a minute. Yeah, I can hear you, Rich. Okay, so we're going to move on until we fix Dale. Looks like he's frozen in time, at least where I am. But my next question is, no, you're not frozen. You're moving.
I can't hear me.
You can't hear me?
I can't hear myself.
Oh. Well, let's try this. Since I can hear you, we'll just move forward. Just pretend you're hearing yourself.
All right. Well, let me make a comment on that last question that you asked.
Okay.
The corporate tax was increased before the virus problem hit the state. That was done, I think, a couple of years ago. We extended it. And part of the reason why the justification was to increase the corporate tax rate for New Jersey was because corporations were receiving a significant benefit from the federal tax cut structure. You may remember under the Trump administration, corporate tax rates was reduced substantially from, I think, around 35% to 23%. So part of the logic on the part of state legislators, particularly driven by Senator Sweeney, was, well, if we need money, and this was even before the virus problem, well, let's increase the corporate tax. Second point, the income tax that was increased, it can't be used for anything the governor wants it to be used for. By Constitution, all income tax revenue must be used for property tax relief. In fact, the majority of the income tax money goes back to school districts in the form of state aid in order to ameliorate the increases or to steady the increases in many school districts. So that money is pretty targeted. It can't be just used for anything that the governor wants it to be used for.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Rich. So we're going to try, I'm not sure if we're going to, hopefully we'll get Dale back on. I think he's having probably a problem with his internet connection. But let's move on. Rich, I got plenty of questions for you. So yesterday I read a fascinating article from the Tax Foundation, which is a pretty conservative think tank. And it claims that state and local aid in the Federal American Rescue Plan is 116 times higher than those states' revenue losses. So according to the article, New Jersey state and local government revenue losses were $150 million in 2020, but New Jersey and local governments in New Jersey will receive over $10 billion is the latest under the American Rescue Plan. And according to my math, this is about 60 times the amount of revenue they lost in 2020. So to me, Rich, this is mind-boggling. Are these numbers being taken out of context? Am I missing something here?
I think we just got done talking about that. That is that the state of New Jersey, anyway, didn't really lose any revenue from its original revenue structure. And therefore, one could argue that we didn't need any additional money. So as it has to do with New Jersey, that's an accurate observation. That doesn't mean that we can't use the money in some way, But the point of that article was suggesting we didn't really need it. Now, what the other states and local governments, their problems were, I have no idea, each individual state. Although current reporting would suggest some of the states who thought they had big problems, similar to New Jersey, really didn't. So I don't know what else to add to that other than those points.
Right. Okay. Well, that's okay. Well, then I'm glad to know that I read that correctly. So hey, I'm not complaining about all that money coming in, but anyway. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the first Murphy budget that didn't include tax hikes, a move that has obviously been applauded by business groups. However, the budget does rely on $4.5 billion in non-recurring revenues, which is about 10% of the budget. So this question is for you, Dale. It's kind of political. Assuming for a moment that Murphy wins re-election, will we see new taxes in his future budgets to cover this? It would seem to me if he doesn't do pension and benefits reform, and he doesn't do deep spending cuts, well, then taxes will be the only option. Does this sound about right?
I've worked through a couple lame duck governors. We haven't had that many of them, but it's funny how the legislature treats a lame duck governor. I saw it with Christie Whitman, and of course, Christie ran for president. They remind you you're a lame duck within a month after you get reelected. So you also, as a term-limited state, you have people like Steve Sweeney, the current Senate president. You have Speaker Craig Coughlin, and possibly others in the legislature all of a sudden start to think of themselves as gubernatorial candidates. So my point is that I think the politics of the future will weigh against the governor and his ability to raise taxes. Listen, the budget picture that we've discussed is clearly rosy, but if you talk to either legislative leader, they are aware of the burden that they have to make sure that this doesn't all get spent and that we do look to the future. So I think that the budget picture and the budget process now through the end of end of June will be a bit more aggressive and a bit more contentious in terms of how money gets spent than we might think today. So we'll have to see. But again, when you start looking at yourself as a gubernatorial candidate, you take a different view on issues, especially spending and taxes.
Okay. Rich, I have one last fiscal question for you, and then we'll move on to politics. So what are the rating agencies saying about our fiscal future?
I have no idea what the rating agencies are saying. As far as I know, they have not pontificated. I'm sure they're a lot better, view New Jersey a lot better now than they did 5 or 6 months ago. As far as I know, none of the rating agencies have made any movement to increase the state's credit rating, which is last time I looked was A-, one of the lower rated states in the country. Having said that, I'm sure they're pleased that the state made its pension contribution. I'm sure they're aware of some of the points that I made, that we have a surplus that's going to go from $6 billion to $2 billion over a one-year period of time, and how does the state adjust for that one-time decrease in money? But I don't think they have responded, positively or negatively. Every state is in difficulties to some degree, even those who are sort of recovered like New Jersey in the short term. But all states, I think, or most states, continue to have longer range problems facing them. And how we deal with them over the next couple of years will be critical. But in the short term, I don't think they have made any adjustments to the state's credit rating.
Thanks, Rich. So let's move on to politics. I'm looking at Dale, though. You can't tell because this is happening by video. So another big difference with this year's proposal is that it happened 4 years ago, but this is the first time in 4 years. And that said, it's happening in an election year where all legislators are up, 120 of them, and obviously the governor. So I got some questions for you, your political insight. So first of all, how have the Democrats and how have Republican lawmakers reacted to the budget proposal?
If you read their statements that they issued publicly, from a Democratic perspective, they like their options. As I said before, the leadership has expressed caution. This is good news. They all focused on the pension payment as a plus. They also like the idea of no new taxes. So, that kind of was their underbelly set of messages, and what they ultimately do. We'll find out over the next couple months. The Republicans tended to focus on the fact that the governor went and issued bonds for over $4 billion. And of course, things look good. And, we shouldn't have done that. And we should have, continued to ask for federal dollars. And that combined with a better than anticipated revenue numbers, that could have gotten us by. So the attack by the Republicans on the budget was the unnecessary issuance of bonds that we're going to now have to deal with for the next 10 years. Okay.
What's the reaction been from business groups?
Sure. No, listen, the business community has, was early on, was concerned that there would be tax increases, and a coalition led by the Chamber of Commerce and the New Jersey Business and Industry, which was signed on by dozens of other business groups from around the state, regional and very local, urged the governor no new taxes, and in the same breath asked for money set aside for business loans and grants. So arguably, both of those were met in this budget and will continue to play themselves out. And as I said, there might be some federal double down dollars that will be helpful as well. So, it's difficult when you're in a position, you have your members are trying to keep the doors open. So everybody, I think, has been cautious about how critical they want it to be of the administration. But again, so far, people seem to be outside of the $4 billion in debt the state has incurred. People have been generally accepting of the fact that this budget will get them through this year.
So do you think the legislature is going to make any significant changes to the proposed budget? And I'm sure there'll be lots of small ones, but do you see anything significant?
I think what the area that I'd watch, Jeff, is how much that they urge the governor to put into surplus, right? I mean that's going to be the key. So I don't see them making any changes to the direct payments to families. Certainly, education is always really the big fundamental discussion during the budget process. But I think you're going to see the legislature looking to see if there's a way to allocate more money to surplus.
Okay, and for the upcoming elections, what do you think the big issues will be?
Prior to the pandemic, the governor was struggling. He was below 50% in some of the statewide polls that we typically see. The pandemic allowed him to speak to people and to folks in New Jersey on a daily basis. His numbers got as high as, I think, 71. We haven't seen any of the public polls recently on the governor's performance, but most believe he's in the high 50s, low 60s as having performed well in managing the pandemic. And quite frankly, that has been the focus of everybody in the state, right? Whether you're a family person or you're trying to run a business, you're just trying to keep all of those things afloat. So unless you've been directly affected by an unemployment system that maybe has been difficult for you to manage, or, you had somebody who died because of COVID, you're just happy that you're safe. And so you're typically giving the governor good marks. So from the Republican challenger's perspective, presumptive nominee Jack Ciattarelli has to look to try to pierce the veneer of the pandemic and what has occurred there. And there are some things that, I suspect the candidate will take jabs at the governor on. But, to get then back to a lot of the bread and butter issues that typically New Jerseyans care about, and that's their property taxes and, what they pay for both for their municipal and education taxes. But again, the governor has been able to come across as a leader during the pandemic, and that's going to be that could be tough for anybody to overcome.
So it's interesting because I remember last March, early March, one of the things you mentioned was that so much of New Jersey doesn't even know who the governor is, and now with the coronavirus, a lot more people know who he is. So that problem is no longer a factor. So let me just ask you this, if you feel you can comment on this, but what do you think the election outcomes will be? On the legislative side, if folks may not know, every 10 years we're supposed to go through a redistricting process. And because of the pandemic, the National Census Bureau was unable to process census data on a timely basis. So New Jersey chose to delay its legislative redistricting process for another year and a half. So typically legislators would be running in new districts come this fall. That's not going to happen. So right now I'd say you have maybe 2 or 3 districts that are nominally competitive, so a lot of money will be spent there. But I don't think we'll see much in the way of changes. Republicans, Tom Kean, Senator Kane's not running again. So I'm sure the Democrats will put a lot of money in that seat. Against that seat, Senator Kip Bateman from the Somerset County area is not running for re-election. He was very popular there, but that district has become a bit more competitive. So, the Republicans are going to have to play some defense just to maintain the margins that they have. On the governor's race, again, it's today it's Governor Murphy's to lose. And if the pandemic, in some odd way, the better the pandemic becomes, the more people then begin to focus on other things, right? They're not worried about, somebody getting COVID, but they're worried about getting back to work. And so in a weird way, it would be better if the pall of the pandemic continued on through the election, because it would give him something to talk about on a regular basis, as opposed to kind of bread and butter issues that people would migrate to once they felt that the pandemic was in the rearview mirror. But again, today it's his to lose, and the Republican challenger is going to have to critique some of his handling of the pandemic, as well as talk about the fiscal condition of the state, which, there are some liabilities there for the governor, but whether or not people are going to be listening is another question. Thanks, Dale. So we are approaching the end of our broadcast, and so let me ask each of you for your closing thoughts about the budget and anything we might not have covered today that you'd like to talk on. Rich, let's start with you.
I think the state needs to think about what the situation is going to be in 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. No state, very few states project their budget out beyond year 1. I would argue that we need to have a 3 or 5 year projection for what I would call current services budget to see what the real problems are. It will be glaring that we have lots of shortfalls. And therefore, we need to do seriously things like consolidation of school districts, reforming of the pension systems, consolidation of police forces, perhaps countywide as opposed to each individual jurisdiction having their own. The need to have a rainy day fund. All of these things, I could go on. All of these things need to be considered. And the fact that we're now going to be getting $6 billion of revenue that we didn't think we were going to get is a perfect opportunity to, between now and July 1st, to figure out, or at least to set in motion, some kind of leadership that says, we need to step back and think. I would add to it the tax structure. We have lots of tax expenditures in our system, $33 billion of tax exemptions and credits. Some of them are good. Some of them are not so good. So we ought to take a look at that. We don't necessarily have to raise rates on taxes to get money. We could alter the exemptions and credits for the ones that are egregiously not necessary. So now's the time to do it. I'll end on that positive note.
Thanks, Rich. Dale, do you have any final thoughts?
The governor and the legislature really need to look at how they can take advantage of this budget and put in place a long-term plan. I think there's a lot of support for a lot of the initiatives that Senator Sweeney laid out over the last couple years. I think would be moving on some of those. Rich alluded to consolidation, pension reform. Now would be the time to do that. We always talk about not letting a crisis go to waste. Well, here's an opportunity to take advantage of a crisis and put us in a better position than when we started. And I think certainly that is that should be the hope and the goal.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Rich. As always, I've learned a lot from you guys. I feel like I just sat through a Budgeting 101 class. I'm sure our members have also learned a lot. And I want to thank you so much for joining us again.